As with any other hobby or practice, if you're passionate about it and you spend a lot of time on it and you try to improve constantly, then there might be a point where it actually grows into something bigger. Some people become like deep breeder with a certain species or really well skilled when it comes to setting up terrariums, building backgrounds, or whatever other practices in life. And before you know it, your hobby actually takes you to a place where you did not expect to be when you started it. And with our guest of today, Alex, I think that's a great example of how this can happen. And for those who enjoy plants, this is gonna be a really great one also. So let's get just right into it, and I hope you will enjoy this episode as well as I did. Welcome everybody to the European Herpetoculture Podcast. This episode we have another guest joining us, and that is Alex. And for that reason, we also have Till joining us because I think Till is a great fit for this guest, and you guys already know each other a little bit, so that definitely helps. And we're really looking forward on getting into this together with you and have a little bit of conversation. But before we are gonna get into that, I think it will be nice for the listeners and for us also a little bit to get to know you a little bit better. So would you like to start maybe with how you got into this hobby, maybe your journey, and also the point you are now?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, first off.
For sure.
So I've been keeping various animals, from insects to amphibians, reptiles, just basically everything you can imagine, since I was about, I think, 12 or 13 years old. And I can pretty much remember exactly how that started. I've always been a kid that went outside and caught bugs, much to the dismay of my parents. And when we were on vacation in Greece, where my mother's side of the family is always in the tall grass looking for turtles and snakes and so on. And but it never occurred to me until I was about 13 years old that I could keep these animals at home as well. So I went to a very, very big pet store here in Germany. Claims it's the largest pet store in the world, with a friend. And that's the first time I saw a praying mantis in a terrarium. And that sort of hit me. Wait, I can keep these at home. And basically ever since then, that was when I was 13, I'm 31 now, I've always had something, started with a praying mantis and then some, how you start, like a bearded lizard, chameleons. Then I had quite a few chameleons, dart frogs, but almost always some invertebrates, and that's still my favorite part of the hobby. So praying mantises, tarantulas, scorpions, whip spiders, everything,
Cool.
Yeah. And it got more and more and more. And my parents were not a big fan of that. I lived at home at the time, and I had this entire wall full of terrariums, but also just boxes, Eventually, though, I, finished school, and then I started studying biology at my local university. And it's a pretty tough course. It takes a lot of time, and the care for my animals, I started noticing it started to suffer, especially when you get done with like the basic courses and you get into like actually writing your degree. So I reduced my collection down about 95%. Basically had nothing anymore, kept one spider, kept one chameleon, and then eventually also got rid of those because with like my master's degree, I wanted to travel. We went to Costa Rica for that, to collect data for 2 months, and I didn't really have anyone to take proper care of many animals. So I reduced it all down. And then during writing my master's, actually, we got the idea to, start a company around terrarium plants, jungle leaves. So studying, writing your thesis, and founding a company, there was no time, no time left for any animals. But yeah, that was a few years ago now. Company started. I'm done with my degree, and you can see behind me, I started again. I can't stop. I always have to have something. So it's slowly building back up. but not at the scale it was before. I had a lot of stuff in boxes. I was breeding a lot of stuff as well. But now with, a bit more settled living situation, I want stuff to be nice, and I want there to be fewer of it. I want fewer and nicer setups now. And that's basically where I'm at right now.
Nice. Thank you. I'm very curious about what you keep right now, but before we ask that question, I'd like to know at which point you just told us about your animals, but I'm curious at which point did you start to get also into plants and terrarium plants? Because I guess you didn't start with plants at the
No,
point
not at
where
all.
you
Not at all.
found the jungle, at least. Yeah.
Yeah. It was a very gradual process. The first maybe 4 or 5 years of me keeping plants until I was maybe 70, keeping animals, sorry, until I was maybe 17, 18 years old. My terrariums basically were planted with whatever was cheap at the local garden center, which was just a short walk. So I just went there, I picked something up, and then usually it would die within 3, 4, 5 months, because the lights on the terrariums were also just whatever I got from the hardware store for cheap. And I didn't really care. If the plants die, I switch it out. Like in the big chameleon terrariums, I always had like a Benjamin Ficus Benjamina. I always bought a big one because they were relatively cheap. The chameleons can climb on them. They lost all their leaves after a few months, and then they died, and then I bought a new one. And but eventually I started getting into like dart frogs. And I would look online how to build a dart frog terrarium, and you would see these absolutely beautiful planted jungle-like tanks. And I started to think maybe I want to do something like that. And that was around 2012, 2013. And there weren't a lot of resources online at the time for that. Like, where do you even get these plants? There were maybe 1 or 2 stores that you could buy them at online. But then there was also no information really about how to grow them. Just stick them in your terrarium and hope for the best, basically. Yeah. But it went from there. And once you get sort of into that, that space of I can actually buy plants online, like that's something you have to realize as someone that never even considered doing that. So that sort of clicked eventually. Wait, I can actually get these online. And you start researching, and that was a time before like Instagram was really popular for sharing plants and on social media and so on. So you mostly were on forums, forums full of mostly old people, the plant forums, I mean, like the orchid forums and so on. You would see these people that have amazing collections, but no way to get the plants. And I started studying at that time, and the university has a botanical garden. And I went there a lot, talked to the gardeners, and sort of a connection formed there. And that was a source for plants for me, because the gardeners were very nice. If you just ask them nicely, they'd give you cuttings. And that's how that started.
Noted.
In fact, we have a really, really big philodendron melanochrysum at the greenhouse. That's originally from a cutting I got from a botanical garden back in 2013, I think.
Wow.
My first year of studying at university. And that was back when you could not buy this plant. It was basically a unicorn in the European hobby. In America, you could get it like single node cutting, no leaf, $500. Roundabout. So I was very proud at the time. I stuck it in the terrarium, and it grew and grew, and I cut it, and I sold the pieces on eBay. And that's slowly how this developed. And this whole terrarium plant scene also, I think, in the last 4 or 5 years, especially, has developed a lot.
So how did that from getting into the poison dart frogs, realizing what is possible to create, finding the plants, how did that turn into a business?
You'd think this would be a well-planned decision or something like that. So what happened was, so I got more and more plants, of course, and eventually it was less, okay, I want to keep this animal. It was more, I want to make a really cool setup and then I'll see what animal can fit in there. And I had a few of those, but at the time I was still focused on studying biology. Like that was about the time when I started my master's degree. And when I came back from Costa Rica, which was right when COVID hit, by the way, cut my stay there that was planned for 2 months short to 10 days.
Oh.
And I had to work with the data that I got in those 10 days instead of 2 months. And then I was set with two other kommilitonen.
Maybe if you know the German word, Tilken.
Yeah, kommilitonen, I would just
with
say
2 other students.
right.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
other
yeah.
So I
students,
was set in the same office. Once you write your master's degree, you get your own office. So we were sharing an office with the 3 of us, and of course you get to talking. And I knew these guys before a little bit, but not too well. And we started talking about job opportunities and what to do with a master's degree in biology. There really are not that many options apart from staying in academia, of course, which is it's self-exploitation, really. Honestly, anyone that's in academia will probably agree. You're not there for the money. So we started talking and we sort of realized we've all been doing the same sort of thing, which is we have large collections of plants and animals at home. And initially the idea was just, hey, this collection is growing over our heads, literally. Maybe let's rent a space together where we can just throw our collections together. We pay for it together, and then we have a cool space for our stuff. And so we went looking around just in the area where we live for good greenhouses to rent, and checked a few, really not great. And then we found the location that ended up being Jungle Leaves, which was a really beautiful garden, beautiful plot of land, really well connected to the Autobahn, with a little store, really good intact greenhouse with good heating. And the owner of the place wasn't the gardener or anything. He bought it because it went under some years ago. And he didn't know what to do with it. And he found no one else for this space. He wanted to turn it into a storage facility, actually, before we came along.
Okay.
And so he gave us a really good rent for this. And then we sort of got the idea, hey, maybe we can turn this into something, maybe not the main thing we do. Maybe we keep studying, we finish our degrees, maybe we look for normal jobs. But if this goes well, maybe this could be something. And it turned out it was. And very, very quickly, we realized that this is kind of what we wanted to do. And there was such a good resonance to this. We got so much good feedback and lots of people that were supportive of the idea that we just did it. And now we all work there full time with 3 employees. And it's just been growing since then.
Great. It's funny that you had the facility for a place to grow and sell plants before you had the idea of starting a shop. Nice.
And the timing also seems almost perfect then, because this must have been like within a year after COVID then, or 2 years?
No, it was actually while COVID was still going on. So I was finishing my degree. The other 2 were finished in that semester where COVID hit. I mean, it sounds kind of macabre, but really a lot of businesses going under at the time sort of helped us because you could get stuff, because we run a local store as well. It's not only an online store. We could get stuff for really cheap, like registers and counters and so on, because we had nothing. We didn't take out a loan. It was all out of pocket from what we saved up. We did eventually get into a program by the state we're in, where you get your living expenses covered if you start a business for 1 year. And you have to pitch the project and so on. But we got this money from the program, and that really helped, actually, because our living expenses were covered. So we only had to care for renovating the place. Because it was, 7 years, there was no one in there. And that's what it looked like if you don't take care of a greenhouse and a building for 7 years. but we hadn't we didn't have the money to hire anyone, so we did all of it ourselves. I had to learn to take apart an oil heater and put it back together, and underfloor heating, and we had to pave all of the entire plot basically, because all it was overgrown by bamboo. And so we had to rip everything out and do all of it ourselves. And it I can still feel that in my bones. I hate bamboo now.
The love has died.
Yeah. Yeah, but it took about a year, and that was the year during COVID, actually. So basically starting in March and finishing that winter, we overhauled the place, and then we opened in next March.
What I wondered is you kind of slid it into this professional route, and now it seems like you're doing very well with it. Are there any things, or did your perception from the perspective of a business owner inside this hobby change your view on the hobby itself, or what did you learn on that road to becoming a professional?
Mhm. Well, you don't start out a professional. I have no experience in this like horticulture space. It started from a hobby, and there were a lot of things to learn. Also, starting a business, I have no business degree.
Yeah.
None of us have, and so we had to basically teach ourselves. There were some very helpful, actually, courses at university, at like a founders startup program that you can visit, where you get taught a lot of things. So we did that while we were still enrolled in university. So it was all free, which was very, very nice. That was a very good start. And I really like universities for offering this stuff for potential business founders. So we learned a lot there, but we didn't also learn about horticulture there. Like the business side, okay, we learned that, but the horticulture stuff is all stuff that we had to acquire ourselves.
Yeah.
So we talked with some other people in that space, found them online, wrote some emails, and they taught us a lot of stuff, like how do you order plants, something like that, because we don't only produce our own plants, like the rare stuff, yes, but we also sell a lot of more normal house plants and stuff. Where do you get those? What do you pay? What should you pay? Stuff like that. That really took some learning as well. It took like 2-3 years to really get into what's required to run a business like this. And if this has shifted my perspective on the hobby, maybe, yeah, a little bit. Because I think now a lot of people would really like to do more if they're in this reptile hobby or just herb hobby in general, terrariums, would like to do more with plants, but they don't really have a starting space for a lot of information and sources, and the books are kind of outdated, at least the ones I know, with how to plant a terrarium and stuff. And we're sort of there with the website that has a lot of good information on how to get started. And now we also run a YouTube channel and so on. We want to do some tutorials to get more people like into that side of the hobby, to not have the typical box with bark chips in the bottom, and then you have a golden pothos in the corner, and that's it. I mean, the animals mostly don't care, so I don't mind that, but it could all be a bit nicer. And we get a lot of people in our store, because there is no local stores that sell plants like this, or that can really anymore really teach you about how to build a terrarium. Those small owner-run stores have really gone under in the last few years in this space. And probably if I was running a pet store, I would also be bankrupt right now, because that's it's just not a thing anymore, really, these small stores. But in the plant space, this has been expanding. But yeah, we're really the only plant store where you can go to and tell me, hey, I'm getting into terrariums. I want to do it nicely. What can I do? And all the other, at least as far as I know, all the other plant and terrarium stores are either online or they're big chain stores where, depending on what sort of employees you get, they can help you more or less.
When you take a look at your website, you can also tell that you all three have a scientific background because you can, without making this an advertisement or something, but you can see you put a lot of love into describing every single plant and check out the latest data and stuff. So that's also very helpful if you want to get into a new plant. I haven't seen that in most online shops so far. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of effort. It's a lot of time required to do this, and it really is the only connection this whole store has to that we actually studied biology and botany in the case of my colleagues, because of course, studying botany, you don't learn how to grow plants.
Yeah.
You know, that's when you become a gardener, that's what you learn. But like the access that I can go to sources for proper information on plants, that I can understand them, that's from studying biology. And I think it's important to get a lot of good information out there, even though if it's maybe written sometimes a bit dry and the texts are a bit long, I know that. I don't think many people read the entire text that's on the plants, but the people that like that information or that want that information, they find a good source on our website, I think.
Cool.
Because especially now with AI stuff like these content farms that spit out just factually wrong texts that get rated very highly on Google because they get a lot of clicks. There's so much misinformation now about growing plants, about everything really. But I only notice in the spaces that I'm an expert on. It's very hard to find really good information right now.
Yeah. It's interesting that you also said that you felt like there wasn't really any info or plans available for you when you really got into it. Because if I think about it, when I started with the hobby and actually got into trying to do it a little bit more like the complete package for my animals, I was also digging into where the plants came from. And sourcing those plants was so difficult. First finding out where they're from, and then actually sourcing them was very difficult. So do you feel like the amount of people who have interest in using these plants in their terrarium, actual terrarium plants, or maybe even plants from the region their animal is from, do you feel like this group is growing, or as soon as they realize it's possible that they get in deeper, like, oh, this is the same feeling, like, oh, wait a minute, it's actually possible now, let's go?
Yeah, I think that has increased a lot, especially with social media now. If you're in this hobby, you're probably looking at some account on Instagram or TikTok or whatever, and you're getting suggested things, and you start seeing things that you didn't used to see unless you were on some forum, which is pretty small subgroup of people in this hobby. But now everyone is on social media, and despite all the bad things on there, it's also good for something. And it's getting inspiration and seeing things outside of your own bubble, really, what you're or what you know, and seeing that and wanting to imitate it or do something similar. I think that gets a lot of people into more bioactive, but actually bioactive terrariums and biotope and habitat tanks that sort of actually imitate nature. And I mean, for a long time, I remember. You had to keep everything clean. Everything needed to be super clean, and you needed to switch out your substrate every 3 months. And no live plants because they die and then it's unclean again. And I think that has shifted a lot. That people also have a different understanding of how you can run a terrarium as an actual little ecosystem. I feel that's coming over more from like the aquarium side, which has been doing this sort of stuff for a lot longer than terrarium keepers. Plus the whole aquascaping thing. It's sort of terrascaping, which is a new thing, which the aquarium people have been doing for like 20, 30 years ever since it's been popularized by Amano, like the 90s. But it feels like the terrarium hobby is catching up to that now, and a lot more people are getting into this for the aesthetic, actually, instead of seeing I want to keep this cool snake, which I think was the default. I think a lot of people now are just seeing a super cool terrarium on Instagram or whatever, and think I want to have like a little rainforest in my home.
Yeah. I also used to have I had a pet store. I started when I was 21, and just like you, I knew how to sell or care for animals, but I had no idea about business. But I remember I also had a reptile section, and then there was this couple of people coming in, and then one of the couple was always like, "No, I don't want no snake," or "I don't want no." And then it came to the section, and there was one like really nicely decorated paludarium or saltwater aquarium, whatever, and they were like, "Oh, but that I like." So it was not only that single animal with whatever perception they had on it. It was like, "Oh, that actually is very aesthetically pleasing," and so I can understand that people, if they look at it like that, that they also approach it differently. Yeah.
I mean, I come from the invertebrate side of the hobby also, and mostly mantises, praying mantises. That's my main thing. Been keeping them for 15 years. I've bred probably 30, 40 species. And a praying mantis terrarium is a box with a single stick in it. And there's really not much more that this animal needs. But just very recently in the store, we have these from a company called Oase, which mostly makes pond pumps and stuff. They have this Biorb series, which are quite expensive all-in-one terrariums. And they sponsored a few for us, gave them to us. And I wanted to make something different in one of them. And I did a biotope for a Borneo tank that actually looks like rainforest floor in Borneo. And it's not pretty, because real rainforest forest is really, really boring. And the terrarium is really boring. But there's a mantis in there that lives on the ground there, and you can't see it. It's completely invisible. And I think that's so cool. And it's completely different aesthetic than a normal terrarium. And that sort of stuff I feel like this hobby is needs more of. And I think a lot more people are getting into something like that.
Yeah. What species is the mantis?
Deroplatis desiccata. It's a dead leaf mantis. I actually have some babies here. Wait.
That's for the Lantanotus setup.
Yeah.
You don't just buy one mantis, right? You buy like 10.
Of course.
So that's how you normally keep a mantis.
Up when you said Borneo.
Yeah. I'm a big Borneo fan. I have the Lantanotus, so I try to make a really nice. Oh, that's cool.
I hope it focuses. I think.
Nice.
Okay, it can't focus that close, but it looks like a dead leaf. This is a small one. There's an adult one in the Biorb.
I can imagine indeed that if you have a real forest floor biotope, which is indeed pretty brown and messy almost, then they will disappear. Cool.
Very cool.
So are you able to, because it feels like in the store, of course, it's a business, but it came from just a hobby that's expanded and grew out of whatever. Are you able to combine your hobby and your business? And do you still have some animals yourself, or maybe try more at the business, at the store?
Both, actually. I mean, I have some animals at home, not a lot, because I'm still pretty strapped for time. It takes a lot of time to run a self-owned business like this, even if we're a team of 3. So like normally like 50, 55-hour weeks, sometimes more. So I don't have as much time for the animals at home. So I'm really keeping stuff that's low maintenance here, like the mantises, or like I have one dart rock terrarium that really doesn't need very much attention. And then at the store, Well, we have some terrariums there, and they are for showing customers that come in what you can do. They're on purpose, except the Borneo biotope, which is very special, but the other ones are just normal. Or purposefully, we didn't put much rare plants or expensive stuff in there. It's just really nicely made terrariums with dart frogs. And they're kind of a hobby thing, right? They don't need to be there. But it is good. It's good for business. People see them, people want to imitate them, but it's also, I can be at work, I can look at the dart frogs if I find an excuse. And plus, of course, the plants themselves are a hobby, and not every plant that's in the greenhouse is for sale. So we have some private plants there. It's usually the big like mother plants that we use to propagate from for the rarer stuff, but also some that we just grow them out so people can see what they actually look like when they're big, because you can usually only buy really, really small plants of most things, and they don't necessarily represent how things look like. For example, the mangrove you have in the background there, it's a baby mangrove tree, and it doesn't even have the stilt roots yet, but they get a few years. So we're growing a few mangroves to a big size so that when people come in, they can see, well, okay, if I take care of it, it can be like that. And of course, that's also a business thing, to sell plants. But it's a hobby thing, right? I just want to have like a nice big plants in there that I can grow to a size that I never could in a terrarium or at home. So really, it's a huge hobby space also.
With your private collection of plants, what's your niche there? So with the animals, it's more the mantis. What are you focusing on? What are you liking most?
Okay, that's like asking for your favorite child, isn't it?
It is.
I do have actually a private collection of plants that I have nothing to do with the store, and those are in the basement. And those are all highland plants, so from tropical highlands, 1,500 meters and up, that need cool temperatures. And the greenhouse we have, it's a heated greenhouse. It's very warm, and it's kept warm in winter. So these plants could never go there. That's also why they're in my basement, because it's naturally cool down there. It never goes above 22, and at night it goes down to like 12, 13 degrees. The plants really need that. Those are my private plants, and those are kind of my favorite, of course. Those are pitcher plants, Nepenthes. Or there's carnivorous plants with the traps that insects fall into. And all of the most spectacular ones, they grow in the mountains. You can't grow them in a warm greenhouse or even in a normal terrarium. They would just die. They need the cold. Yeah. And other than that, at the greenhouse, my favorite, probably begonias. For people that don't know, they're usually kind of small herbaceous plants. So no woody stems or anything, just small weeds, but they have the most spectacular leaves. Every color imaginable, every shape imaginable, from one that looks like grass to ones that grow like a thick stem and blue on the leaves and pink and everything. And those are good terrarium plants. Every terrarium should have a few of those.
That's a good statement.
So you said that the interest for the plants stemmed from a more good word in this stemmed from a more just aesthetically pleasing image you were looking for and dove into. Do you also think that having actual live plants in your terrarium with your animals have other benefits? Is there something that you feel like this is another reason for you to actually try to add more live plants?
Oh, yes, absolutely. First off, in a tropical terrarium, in a tropical setup, the plants stabilize the humidity a lot. If you have a well-planted terrarium, you often don't need a misting system or anything. And it's much nicer actually for both the plants and animals if they don't get sprayed with water constantly. It's a lot less stress, loud pump going on and sudden rain. If you have a bunch of plants, it can just sit there and regulate itself. Also, you have nutrient uptake. in terrariums where you don't remove the feces. Like in dart frog terrariums, it's impossible to get rid of the poop. But you get nutrient cycling like you get in an aquarium with a well-run filter. If you have good planted terrarium with nice substrate in it that all sort of microorganisms live in, the plants all take up the feces that get processed into nutrients, and it's very clean. But also for a lot of animals, I think plants are quite important for behaviors. Like you see a lot more natural behaviors in a well-planted terrarium. A lot more hiding spaces for the animals, so they feel more confident, so you can observe them better. Also for dart frogs, for example, of course, they lay their eggs in bromeliads, they breed their tadpoles in there, some of them. And even stuff like mantises, like these dead leaf mantises that I have here. What they do in nature, they sit on a stick with dead leaves on them, and then they let go with their front legs, and they just hang on there with their hind legs, and so they sway in the wind like a dead leaf. And they only do that if you have a stick in there with dead leaves on it. They don't do that normally. And so you just don't see that if you don't have something that's sort of imitating nature.
This is such a nice add what you said. That I remember that on another podcast, there's a keeper who has polygris, and he actually added an anthurium from the same habitat as the polygris. The anthurium, of course, got seeds, or how was it called? I believe it has a certain name.
Inflorescence?
Yeah,
and
inflorescence.
then it gets
thank you.
Berries.
Yeah, the berries, and the lizard actually started to eat those berries. So that was another this behavior you're only going to see if you add the right plant with the right animal.
Yeah,
really cool. Sorry, sometimes we are doing this, of course, with two, and it's still new, so we're trying to figure out who's gonna ask the question next. Did you have a question, Till?
I have a question in mind, but if you have something that fits, go ahead.
Well, yeah. To maybe for the listener listening to this, like you said, a lot of people maybe want to get started, but don't really know how to, or had experience with their pothos or their Ficus benjamina losing all their leaves, and are like, oh, this isn't for me. What are the most questions you get, or the best tips you give your customers when they are thinking about actually trying to add live plants to their terrariums?
Yeah, this is something we get a lot. And the best advice I can really give is that you should plan out the terrarium with plants in mind right away, because adding them later often doesn't really work. Because what you do, you set up your terrarium without plants, and you already set your climate and your lights and so on for the animal. And then adding plants to that later, it often doesn't work, because the terrarium is just not set up to be able to grow any plant. So if you start with the idea, I'm going to put plants in there, then you can plan way better what you want to do. And it doesn't need to be anything like special or super rare, or you don't need to do anything super exotic if you just get started. Even golden pothos can look so good if you just grow it well. It's a popular plant for a reason. And one advice I give is that plants need light. And you sort of have a wrong perception if you're not in this plant space, how much light a lamp produces, any lamp, and how much light a plant actually needs. Because most of the lights that we buy that are for terrariums, like marketed for terrariums, they're actually very, very weak compared to like a plant lamp. So you usually don't get good plant growth if you just use like a heat spot and a UV bulb, and it's often it. You need some supplemental lights to grow plants usually. And then also, don't please stop putting bark chips in your terrariums. Nothing will grow in there. And I have yet to really know of any animal that prefers them over like a proper substrate that they can dig in, but that also a plant can properly grow in. And just those two things, you will notice such a big difference with basically anything you put in there. Proper light, proper substrate, and then I guess don't forget watering it. But it's usually not a problem in a terrarium. If anything, the opposite is usually the problem, people drowning their stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, right away from the setup, get a proper light. Think of what plants you're going to put where, in the planning, because all of the stuff usually gets kind of big. So plan around that and let plants grow into the terrarium. Don't stuff it full at the beginning so that it looks like your end result that you want to get. A terrarium should look good after 6 months, maybe 12 months of plant growth. So start small, let them, settle, and then let them grow.
Beautiful. Really, really good advice.
Do you have a statement? A statement is maybe the wrong wording, but how do you feel about the term rare plants? You said it yourself. You come from a time where it was very, very hard to acquire a lot of plants, and especially during the phase with the COVID pandemic and the plant hype, and everywhere shops popped up and everyone was having rare plants, everyone was selling rare plants, and nowadays you can go to the classic hardware market or hardware store in Germany and they have a rare plant corner. How rare is a plant that you can get there?
I mean, you already spelled out the contradiction. Everyone was selling rare plants. That's not how that works. I guess it's people often conflate rare with expensive. Those two really have very little to do with each other. Plants usually are expensive for a reason. It's not so much. I mean, the hype of the COVID hype really made a lot of plant expensive because of the high demand that suddenly was there that one was prepared for, really.
Yeah.
And the plants that you see in a hardware store, they're produced at a scale that you really don't think about normally. These are mostly from the Netherlands or from Denmark. And they're grown in greenhouses, completely automated, where you stand at one end of the greenhouse and you cannot see the other end because it's behind the horizon. And these big companies, they have a long lead time to establish new products. They need their protocols. Everything needs to be automated. They need to figure out how to grow the plants exactly, precisely correct, so that everything fits in their machines and so on. Because no one is there repotting plants, right? So that's a machine. It's a huge machine that drives through the greenhouse that does that. So you suddenly had this demand, and then you had these small and medium-sized operations like ours that were able to meet. We were way faster than them. So we were able to sell these plants and at a pretty good markup, especially if you look at now stuff like the classic variegated monstera, the Swiss cheese plant with the holes in the leaves. There's a form of it that has white areas in the leaf. And it was in really, really high demand. And this is one of the most produced plants in the world, the regular one, the green one. The white one is not any different, not in growth speed, not in difficulty of care. It's just that the demand was so high. And now it's caught up. Now they're producing it at scale, and that's why the prices dropped so drastically. So it was kind of rare at one point, but it really isn't anymore. But now this label gets attached to everything that's above a certain price point. If you pay like 30, 40 euros or more for any relatively small plant, it's a rare plant now. And it's still true that these aren't produced at the scale that the regular houseplants are. It's still smaller, like they produce maybe a few 100,000 of them instead of dozens of millions. The EU market is 500 million people. They produce these plants in huge scales. So it's still rare compared to that. It's 100,000 versus maybe 30 million. But the actual rare plants, it's stuff that we propagate for like a small audience of people that know about them. And those aren't anything that's going to be in the hardware store at any point in time, because it's just not worth it. There's no big market for these rare terrarium plants. And rare in this case means I maybe have, like, if I do a round of propagation, I have maybe 30 of them, 40 of them, and they sell over the span of a few months, and then they're gone. And, there's no other source for these. And you need to wait a year for them to come back. Plus, then, of course, there's rare plants that are rare because no one cares, because they're not interesting. The greenhouse is full of things that I, as a biologist, find really, really interesting, because they have some really neat ecology or pollination biology, but they're not interesting or spectacular looking plants. So no one wants them. And they are very, very rare, but they're also very cheap when we have them, because I can't sell them for a lot of money.
Do you have a most underrated plant, in your opinion, like something you are very passionate and interested in, but most of the general public just don't care?
It's not so much they don't care, but my most underrated one is probably ones that people just don't know about, something that it exists, and those would be various kinds of ant plants. These are plants, I mean, all over the world, really, but there's one group of them in Southeast Asia that have a hollow stem. They make this tuber called a caudex, and ants live inside. In nature, not in cultivation. Like, we sell them without ants. But they are absolutely bizarre plants. They look completely alien. They look like something you would see in a video game. And basically no one knows about them. And it's such an obscure group of plants that even you don't find images. There's no images, there's no videos. There are exactly 2 people in the world growing these at a commercial scale. And I know both of them personally. And now we're starting with this too. And I would like for these to be more popular as terrarium plants, because they're not particularly hard to grow, actually. And they're relatively, available if you look at the 2 shops that have them. You need to be quick because they have not many, but you can get them. And wait. So this thing in the background there, that's full of ant plants that I keep at home because they need very stable conditions. So like terrarium conditions. The greenhouse is a bit unstable for them because it gets very hot in the day, it cools down. We open the roof so it doesn't overheat during the day. They kind of don't like that, but I can take a few out of them.
Oh, cool. Look at the excitement in Tils's face.
I still can give you a small ant plant if you want.
Yeah, I would love to.
But it's really small.
Yeah.
What do you
sort of
have here?
Can look like this.
Yeah.
Oh, come on.
Because a lot of them are epiphytic, right?
Almost all of them.
Almost all, okay.
I'll see if I can change the camera settings to not blur this. Settings. I don't think I can change the setting while we're recording. I hope it focuses on it.
We see it's on a succeam base, it seems like.
Yes, it is. It's epiphytic, so it grows like up the side here.
You can see the holes.
If I hold it here, maybe. No, it wants to blur it.
Here we go. Perfect. Much nice.
You see, it has holes in it.
Yeah.
Because this is where the ants would go in and out of. And really cool. And no one knows these plants. Here you go. And that's probably the most underrated group of plants that I can think of. Because they're absolutely bizarre, but in a terrarium, they're easy. There's nothing particularly hard about growing them. You can stick them on a branch, and you get this really cool sort of woody little alien thing.
Yeah, this big bulbous base.
I follow some, I check out some people from more like Southeast Asia on the social medias, because they are also very much into the Staghorn ferns, Platycerium. And sometimes I've seen on these channels that they also propagate the ant plants on boards and hang them between their stack arms. And I really fell for that. There are some species, I think, of Myrmicodia, I hope I get that right, that have these spikes and look very extreme. They look like
There we go.
from death metal logo or something like this.
I'm actually thinking about getting bigger Lanthanotus setups and also higher
Yeah.
Lanthanotus setups, not for the Lanthanotus, but to add more plants. Wow.
That's great.
So that's one of them, I think.
This is so dope. Yeah, that
It's one
looks
focus.
crazy.
Yeah. It's hung up here because it's not properly rooted in here yet, but
Okay.
I'm gonna take these off in like half a year or so.
Yeah. Are they fast, slow growing? Like,
Surprisingly fast compared to like so these are caudex plants.
Yeah.
And mostly plants with the caudex are like dry adapted. Like cacti and so on. They grow in the same habitat. And compared to those, they are really fast. But if you are used to like more normal terrarium plants, they're kind of slow. It's hard to describe, but you can get from a seedling to like a decently sized, like maybe this big plant in about a year.
Yeah,
And after that, something like this is maybe 7 or 8 years old.
Yeah.
But they do need a lot of fertilizer, right?
Yes, a lot.
Yes.
There's no ants in there. Normally, the ants fertilize the plant. It's a mutualistic relation that they have. And you have to replace the ants, basically. So they need a lot of fertilizer to grow well.
I only have like 2 species right now at home, like the most basic ones, I think. But I really like them, but they're still pretty small.
Yeah. If you give them good fertilizer, you get decently sized ones in 2, 3, 4 years, maybe.
Okay, nice. Good to know. And now we've been talking about your favorite underrated plants. Do you have some plants that you think are totally overrated? Not worth the hype? Now we come to the part with the cussing.
Okay, I'm going to make some enemies here.
Okay.
I'm not a huge fan of most variegated plants. So those are plants that have a mutation that makes their leaf, certain parts of the leaf lack chlorophyll. And these parts are usually then white or yellowish. In some of them, they are red. And I think a lot of them look really cool in isolation. But if you put a lot of them together, it's like clown puke. And it does look good. But I'm also not a fan of them because of the like community or scene around them that wants to peddle these plants for absolutely ridiculous prices. It's sort of like, if you want an analogy, it's like ball python moths.
Yeah.
You know how this sort of scene operates. And it's very similar in the plant space, except with the plants, you have stuff like variegated monsteras or philodendrons that you can propagate at home, and within a year, you have 10, 15, 20 of them. So it's even more extreme that these should be so expensive, even though they're so easy to multiply. And I really don't like that aspect. The plants are cool, don't get me wrong, but I don't like this aspect of the hobby. And we also made the decision to not sell plants like this in the store. Like, we have variegated plants, but only once they're at a somewhat reasonable price point, where you can afford it as a normal person. Because I think a lot of this, like these very expensive ones, people don't buy them for the plant's sake. They buy them to show off, for clout. And that's not an aspect I like in this hobby.
Yeah, that goes hand in hand with this rare plant topic. Like, some people just mention the wording rare plant so often, and you start to notice, okay, you most likely talk about rare and expensive, and then you kind of know the direction
it's sort of
they're going
it's
for.
more about sorry for cutting you off.
No, I was finished. Thank you.
Okay, it's more about having something to show other people than having it for your own sake. And I think a lot of hobbies suffer from that, especially with social media, because how important for a lot of people it has become to show off what they have, that they sort of lose track of why they are doing this in the first place. It's something I really don't like. I don't find very sympathetic. And it's unfortunately, especially these variegated plants are associated with that because they are kind of cool looking with the mutations they have.
Yeah, I remember every time for the listeners in Germany, there's this kind of newer expo, the Botanica. It's like a plant expo. And every time I went there, there was a crazy new mutation, and people on YouTube would show it like, check out this. What is it now? I think Monstera Mint Monster or something like this for 50,000 euros. And you are like, what the heck?
And the thing is about plants in this sort of space, within 1 to 2 years, they drop in price 90, 95, 99% in some cases. I remember when a particular form of Monstera obliqua from Peru, where just a few years ago, you would get a single node cutting. So that's a piece of stem with no leaf on it. And you would be in the high 3, low 4-digit range for one of those. So 900 or 1,000 euros. And now we have decently sized ones with like leaves and the nice little established plants for $25 in the store. And that's a 2.5 year difference.
I thought about that when you told about these huge greenhouse machineries in Netherlands and Denmark, because I can still remember when the prices were slowly dropping with the Monstera obliqua Peru. At some points, photos were surfacing of these greenhouse filled with thousands of Monsteras, and people started questioning, maybe they're not worth the money anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, and especially it's a Monstera, and it's a Monstera obliqua, which is one of the fastest and easiest growing species. In fact, you've all seen Monstera obliqua in any hardware store and garden center, just a different form of it that isn't quite as extreme. But this Peru form is basically the same in growth. So there was really never a reason for it to be this expensive, except the demand for it, or the price that people were apparently willing to pay. And people were paying that. You can see on eBay when items are actually sold for what price they are sold. And the people were paying that. And it's just something I never understood, really. Except if I was a commercial grower, that might be worth an investment. But with a turnaround time now of about 2.5 years, I probably wouldn't have made my money back, thinking about it.
Yeah, or you need to cut them in all these small wet sticks and sell them separately. But yeah, it seems like that's a practice you don't want to get into.
No. We never sell cuttings, especially because cuttings are a gamble, and I'm not selling loot boxes to my customers. I want to sell a proper established plant, and if it dies in your care, it's usually your fault and not mine. So I have to think about this from a business perspective as well.
Yes, of course.
For your own safety.
Yes, it's my own safety.
Yeah.
How do I say this? Has it been difficult for you as a business owner in this space to like adhere to these thoughts you have, or to stay also a hobbyist? Or
kind of. I think, or rather, it would be harder to do it like this if the business wasn't running well. If it runs well, I can be very generous with plants. When something, even though it's not my fault, like in shipping, people write us if something goes wrong in shipping, and they expect us to replace the plant, even though I'm not obligated to do that. Because it's not my fault if you don't pick up your package for 7 days and then it comes back to us, or something like that. Or if you put your terrarium plant on your windowsill and it dies in 2 days. It's all things that happen. And then I can be very nice and send a replacement, or I send a refund. But I think if we were really struggling somehow, I would be a lot less incentivized to do this. And that's when businesses turn bad, I think. And I know of some examples in this space that I'm not going to name, where that started to happen. and you get a lot of negative feedback. And these days, if it's on social media, your reputation is bad, then you're basically done for. So it's like a downwards spiral.
Yeah.
But we always try to be on the side of the customer, except if we get insulted.
Of course. Yeah.
But everyone else that comes to me with the problem that happens, and I mean, we are shipping live organisms, right? That is way more difficult than having a warehouse full of stuff that you just have to keep there and pay rent for and do nothing else with, and just stick in a package and ship off. And so much can go wrong, and there's no like specifics in the law protecting me as a business from any of this, because the law assumes you're not sending live stuff in the mail. For example, customer can theoretically buy a plant from me and then just not accept the package, and it goes back to me, and I have to completely refund him, including the shipping cost. Actually, I have to refund the shipping cost. And they can do that as many times as they want, and all of the plants arrive dead back here. For example, in winter, if they need heat packs, customer is not obligated to open the package, put in a new heat pack, and send it back to me. They can just do that. And I have nothing I can do against that. So I'm completely at the goodwill of the customer to not do that to me, right? So it's a kind of a difficult space to operate an online business in.
Interesting.
Yeah. At the beginning, you talked about like some benefits you had, like with the university and these funds from your local government supporting your business. Do you also had some more bad experiences or difficulties with especially the German laws for a business? Because the cliché for Germany is a lot of bureaucracy.
It's a cliche for a reason. It's partly on our side because we have no business experience, so we didn't know what all you had to do as a business owner.
Yeah.
And so we had to figure that out. It took some time to do that, but also the process of filling out forms and having to do, for example, everyone that sends packages has to pay a fee to cover the recycling or destruction of the material that you send out, like the cartons and the plastic. We don't use plastic, as we try to avoid it. But stuff like that, and it takes so long to sign up that by the time you signed up, you're actually in debt to them, and you have to pay a fee. Stuff like that. So that all happened. We do have it more or less figured out now, but even things like, for example, we have employees that also get some benefits, and it took half a year for those to actually arrive on their bank account after everything was confirmed. So for 6 months, they were getting less than minimum wage because the bureaucracy was too slow to actually pay them out. And we had to help them privately because of that, right? Wow. So yeah, you have to jump through a lot of hoops to run a business in Germany. And to run it properly, you need probably at least one full-time employee that just does all of the bureaucracy stuff. And that, I think, kills a lot of business ideas early on once you get confronted with that.
And especially when you're so passionate like you guys, it draws a lot of attention from the nice topic of the plants away to paper and numbers, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. When you get into this from a hobby side for the love of plants, and you end up sitting in an office filling out forms and fighting with bureaucracy, I think that's it really puts a damper on your expectations of, hey, I'm going to be my own boss and I'm going to do what I like and what I love. Yeah. It's a bit of a reality check.
Yeah.
Yeah. But how long has the shop been open now?
4 years now.
4 years. Wow.
We're not quite open. So we founded the company in 2020. But then we renovated for a year and then we opened in 2021. But the company is 4 years old with a store that you can buy from for a bit over 3 years, 3.5 years.
Cool. Are there any, let's start with personal, are there any personal projects you're working on now the dust has settled a bit and you got into your groove almost with your companions? Are there any personal projects you're working on now?
Yes, actually. One of them, I just got the plants out of there. That thing is getting way too small. I need a bigger one. So I'm building one now that just around the corner that you can't see. Much nicer setup for them. As well as I sort of just had the idea, my basement is pretty cool and it has a lot of tech in it for climate regulation. I would really like to keep some highland herbs, which are really not very much kept in the hobby because not a lot of people can do this temperature regulation thing that I do for the plants. I have like an actual cooling unit down there that cools down everything at night. So I can do this temperature swing that the plants need. And there are quite a few reptiles and amphibians that are really not in the hobby because they also need that. And the reptile, the herb hobby isn't quite there yet, or very, very few people do this. For example, there are dart frogs from the highlands, like Amarega. The big Amarega, I think, silver stone.
Yeah.
The black and red one. You can sort of keep it in a normal terrarium, but it would probably be better if it had this day-night swing. Then there are also Cophotis lizards from Sri Lanka, highland lizards. There's one guy, I think, in the US breeding them. And I would really like to get my hands on one of those because I can really do the temperature swing. I can do 25 at night and 25 during the day and 12 at night. I have like a cooling system, heating system, everything. Plus, the mossy tree frogs, Theloderma corticale. The problem with them is the gender distribution, where you get way more males when it's warm. I can keep them at a perfect temperature to get the 50-50 rate or even to just breed females if I wanted to. So I kind of need to clean up my basement. And once I do that, I have some pretty cool ideas.
Wow. Could you maybe get into a little bit on the system you're planning for that? Because I think a lot of people, like the species you mentioned, the Theloderma, Cophotis, Ceratophora, some mountainous snakes or
chameleons
whatever.
as well.
Chameleons, very good example. Now people are moving some of those animals outside, but they're the conditions.
That's also what I did with chameleons in the past.
Yeah.
I had the South American ones, the Bradypodion.
Yeah.
The small ones. You can keep them outside basically all year.
Yeah,
and that works fine.
Yeah. There. Anyway, I think that now in this case it's for plants, but I totally believe that if you have a system that works for your plants from a certain habitat, the animals will also do great in there, because I feel like the plants are often more sensitive than our animals. So if you can make your plants work, your animals probably gonna be fine.
Yes, yeah,
definitely. That's at least my approach. So what type of system are you thinking of there?
So this is not cheap.
No.
Having the plants down there is not cheap, neither in electricity nor in equipment. But how it works is that there's a grow tent, one of these reflective boxes to put plants into. And all the tech is outside because it's very wet in there. You can't put really things inside there. And it has an AC unit, a mobile AC unit on there that has 2 outlets. One for the warm air, and I just pump that outside a window in the basement, and the cold air goes in the grow tent. And this AC unit, you cannot get small AC units. It's impossible for just cooling like a small space. They're always room coolers. So this thing is way overpowered for the grow tent. And the grow tent has many outlets, so I could just connect through a bunch of terrariums where it pumps in cold air at night. And that's how I cool it. During the summer. During winter, it works just fine with pulling in cold outside air, just through the basement window with like a normal duct fan, pumping in the cold air from outside. And since it's at night, I only need the cold air at night. It only runs at night. During the day, it heats up from the lamps. And in the middle of winter, I also have like just a normal ceramic heater in there that heats it up because the basement is too cold. So yeah, in winter I have to run a heater, and in summer I have to run an AC unit. And it's all run over a digital controller that so I can set the temperatures it's supposed to keep and for how long. And it's all connected to also the lights and some fans on there that blow the extra heat from the lights out and so on. So it's a pretty involved system. Plus, humidity control and so on is also on there, and the misting system. So it's completely automated. I kind of don't have to go down there. I only go down there to look at my plants and refill the water.
Yeah, that's perfect.
But yeah, this could be expanded because all of the tech that I had to buy for this is way too strong for what it is. Because the grow tent is only 2.40 m by 120 by 2 meters high. So that's, I don't know, few cubic meters of air that I need to cool and heat. And all of these things are made to heat entire rooms or even a building. So I could connect a bunch of terrariums on there, and they would all get the same temperature control as the plants. And you're definitely right. The plants are a lot more sensitive than the animals. Plants from very specific habitats tend to be, because they can't move. They get exactly one climate. And they're adapted to exactly that climate. Animals can move. If they don't like something, they go away. So animals are usually more adaptable. So yeah, this system would be perfect for them. But it's also an investment of at least, I would say, about 5,000 euros, 6,000 euros for all of the tech that surrounds that.
Yeah, and I bet it takes a lot of energy to keep it running in summer.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
I mean, if I cared about how much I pay for electricity, I wouldn't be doing this hobby, I think.
Good find.
So yeah, but yeah, it's a lot. But also, I mean, the plants grow. I can take cuttings.
Yeah.
I sell the plants. You mentioned the Botanica, this big plant expo that's twice a year here in Germany. And I usually, I take a few cuttings for the next Botanica, and I sell those privately there while we're there with jungle leaves, and that pays for the electricity for the year pretty much.
That's good. Perfect.
So it's sort of self-sustaining, at least the running costs. I'm never getting that investment back, probably, but the running costs are, more or less zero.
Yeah. The reason I asked this also, of course, also for the listener, because I'm constantly thinking that, but also because I was another keeper who had the silverstone eye and beautiful frogs like this big, so impressive, huge, and he jumped so far, and he's building a beautiful setup. Anyway, he also had aircon in the system and everything connected, and it was really impressive what he did. So I was wondering, it sounds like you approach it about similar, so that's really interesting.
Yeah, because there are no solutions for this in the normal hobby space. It doesn't exist. Just like I looked, there's no controller that you can buy for a terrarium that can do different day and night temperatures that can also both heat and cool. You always have the ones that have different day and night temperatures, and you have a heating unit, and it just switches off the heating and lets it naturally cool down. But none of them have a second plug where you can put in a cooling unit to actually get the temperature to the level you want. It doesn't exist. You have to build something yourself.
Yeah.
If you're proficient with like a Raspberry Pi or Arduino, there are programs for that, but you always have to build this yourself. There's no market for this.
No, which is such a shame. I feel like now some companies are trying to do that stuff with the Bluetooth connected LEDs. One of them is hanging above your mangrove. But I recently found it might be interesting also for the listener. There's this timers that are astro timers, they are called, and you can connect them to Bluetooth, I believe. I preferably have Wi-Fi because I can also connect it when I'm on vacation. But you could set them to a certain region to follow the light cycle of that region. So you could select like Hong Kong or Amsterdam or New York or whatever, and it would follow the light cycle of that. And I was like, why isn't this in our hobby? This is perfect. Because every month I'm resetting my timers, or yeah. But it's probably, like you said, there's no market for it, or people have just not figured out they can actually use that.
Yeah, you would never guess what kind of controller I'm using for the setup in the basement. It's for beer brewing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a brewing controller. And it doesn't have a clock in it, but it has times. So I can set a 12-hour day and 12-hour night in just a 24-hour cycle and then just let it repeat. But it can heat and cool, and it has, times. Because in beer brewing, you need to get the yeast to a certain temperature, and then you need to cool it down and so on. And that's why I'm using one of those.
Very creative.
I'm writing this.
And there's a bunch of those, and they're not that expensive, and they do pretty much what I want. Except the clock isn't that great because it's just a timer. It doesn't actually have a real clock in it, so I have to go down there every few months and reset it.
Yeah. But I think this is a great example because a few episodes ago we had Jonas with us, and he also talked about how creative the people who started in this hobby needed to be to actually get stuff done. And now it feels like there's a lot of products we can get, but as soon as you want to go a step further, you get into that creativity again. You gotta think outside of the box and away from like this whatever is presented to you or marketed to you or towards us. So that's great. Yeah, love this.
I mean, also a lot of you see the lights gradually switching off behind me.
Yeah.
A lot of the things that I do with like planted terrariums, there are also no real solutions for. So you have to build it yourself, because this is still something like, the big companies like Exoterra and so on. They're starting to get into that a little bit, but still, I mean, the standard Exoterra terrarium still comes with a plastic background, And if you want a nice planted background, you have to mix up something yourself, and you have to cut styrofoam or use whatever, right? There are really no prefabricated solutions for these really nice aesthetic setups that I talked about earlier that people want now. And I kind of like that. It's a DIY aspect, but it's also like a barrier to get into this. Because you can't just, buy a pre-built kit that allows you to do something like this.
I want to give you some space still before I go full off.
No, go full off. I
mode.
Go into nerd mode.
Well, you talked about the backgrounds, and it's obvious that with your company you have certain values and certain viewpoints on things. I know a lot of frog keepers who have like really nice planted setups. Saxim or tree fern panel is like their golden standard for growth because they really like that. But I sometimes, if I buy Saxim, it's often secondhand, and I use it as long as I'm living, or at least as long, because I feel like it's a natural product and it needs to be done somewhat sustainable. Do you think that Saxim is a sustainable way of creating a background for really nice planted setups?
I mean, it could be, but I'm not sure it is at the moment. We have to see this in a way that this hobby market for this stuff is pretty small. These tree ferns, they get harvested for landscaping. They get harvested for I think even some medicinal uses. I'm not sure for that. And that's the reason they're even grown sometimes, but mostly they're cut from nature. And that's definitely not sustainable. They don't grow fast. But the terrarium hobby, I'm not sure, but I think it's a pretty small fraction of what gets harvested, what lands in our terrariums comparatively to, I need 200 of these for this landscaping project. And they just cut the whole thing down. What we get are mostly spoils from that when they die. That's the trash that gets cut up, that gets sent to us. I'm really not sure anyone is cutting these down so that we can have terrarium backgrounds. Problem is, of course, we are contributing to that. because we are buying them, so they're getting money from us. But even if we all stopped using tree fern, I don't think it would make any impact on their harvesting at all, because we are not the main customers there. But still, we are working on a replacement with the store. We've kind of figured out something that it doesn't use none, but it uses a lot less. And we're calling it Jungle Wall. Very creative. And it's a cocoa peat on a aquarium foam background. It's bound in there with a latex. So the same way you also do like a covering for your styrofoam background in a terrarium. And then there's a very thin sprinkle of tree fern powder on top. And it looks almost exactly the same. And it's more flexible because you got it on a foam, so you can shape it better. And we've been working on it, and it's working really well. In fact, I'm using it in my own terrariums that you can't see back there. And it's growing just as well as regular tree fern. And I'm hoping I can sort of establish that as a decent alternative.
Cool. Well, what a coincidence.
Great idea.
I mean, we've been thinking about that. I mean, we all study biology.
Yeah.
And we all did something that's in a space called organismal biology. I'm not sure if that's the right. So we're working with actual animals and plants. So in biodiversity and conservation, you go out. You're not just in a lab. You are in a lab a lot, but you're not just in a lab. And you go out and you really see what's happening, and you get an understanding of the damage that we're doing to nature. And that sort of informs everything we do.
It's I think we talked about this before on the podcast, or when we were talking privately, the role that the hobby has for conservation. And I think there needs to be a lot of work to be done to establish these thoughts more and more into the hobby, because we ourselves won't save everything, but we can contribute and try to.
I agree to that, but also you have to be a bit careful, because this sort of conservation message gets muddled a lot in the hobby, where suddenly you get the message that, hey, I'm keeping some endangered reptile, I'm contributing somehow to conservation, and you're not. You're really not. This animal has no traceability back to where it came from. It's probably interbred with different populations, and you're not really conserving anything, and the strain you're breeding or whatever you're doing there is never going to get reintroduced. The conservation is happening in like a more professional space at the moment, in zoos that keep track of where animals are from, which animal gets bred with which animal. Plus, there's also always the critique of reintroduction, like as a concept, if it even works. If this, once you remove keystone species, if you can and should restore an ecosystem to how it was before. It's also a discussion happening now in conservation and looking at ecology. It's a complicated topic, and I don't want to get into it too much. But I'm a bit skeptical of the message that we as hobby keepers could meaningfully contribute to conservation in definitely not in the way that the hobby is now, where you go to an expo and you buy some endangered dart frog, and that has nothing to do with conservation, even if you're keeping and breeding it at home.
Yeah, true. But I also meant from the perspective of a customer, because we can, as hobbyists, somehow try to form the hobby a bit more into a sustainable way, and establish better or more sustainable ethics to because we as a bright mass of reptile or amphibian keepers also are the persons that demand these species that get ripped from the wild. So I think that's also a message that needs to be spread more in
I completely agree with that people should be a lot more conscious about what they're doing in this hobby. I mean, in the end, it's the animals have to come from somewhere initially, even if they're captive bred now. So every animal that we keep initially had some removed from nature, and probably often not in a legal and sustainable way. But also you have the reality of it, that you're eventually you're meeting the demand with captive breeding. So the animal doesn't get removed from nature anymore. Hopefully, it kind of doesn't work. You see this in the plant space a lot, especially with I talked about the pitcher plants I have in the basement. You can buy them captive bred, like grown from seed in cultivation, and they still get poached from nature because people just don't want the ones that are produced. They want something special or something individual. Even Venus flytraps. The regular, like little carnivorous plant that snaps its leaves shut. Produced in the dozens of millions in every store. They still get poached from nature. People still are taking them, and I really don't know why. And there's no reason for this, but it keeps happening.
I feel like a lot of people in the plant hobby don't know a lot about poaching and removing plants from the wild. I think it's more in our minds, or in the minds of most people, it's more connected to something like the reptile hobby. And I don't think a lot of people imagine that there are a lot of plants poached. I think I've seen this in Ecuador or Panama with some Anthurium papillilaminum localities that were pretty hyped for some times, and you saw those batches of plants just ripped out, laying on the ground.
Yes, it happens in the plant space. It happens with some very particular plants. Carnivorous plants are strongly poached, as well as cacti. Especially from the South US and Mexico. There are some very rare species there, and people poach them. They end up mostly in Asia, actually. That's the biggest customer for these are there. And just very recently, there's a very, no longer endangered, it's extinct in the wild now. But there were photos of the very last Nepenthes clipeata removed from the wild, poached. The species is extinct now. Went to a customer in Taiwan. Someone posted it on Facebook. It lives on a single mountain on Borneo. And initially, all of the ones that were on top of the mountain were poached, and then there's very steep cliffs, and the poachers eventually even got to the ones on the cliffs. And the plant is extinct now, despite being available. I have 2 in the greenhouse. They cost me 30 euros.
Yeah. Wow, that's very sad.
But also that you know almost the person who got them is kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's kind of shameful. These poachers, they post on public Facebook groups, and you see these huge swaths of really rare, really slow growing plants cut down. It's not like they take 1 or 2 for a customer. They go with trash bags and trucks, and they poach an entire mountainside of a population that probably will take hundreds of years to recover. And it's all gone. The destruction, the scale is unimaginable.
I know that some Nepenthes are CITES protected. Is this really enforced in some manners? Like maybe for you as a store or a hobbyist, do you actually sell animals with CITES? Because of course, with the reptiles, I know I get checked. I need to have a active administration. But a lot of the corals in here officially also have CITES. Nobody checks that. So is that also enforced with plants?
The legal situation is different with plants than with animals. They're also in CITES, but we in the EU, like as long as it's within the EU, you don't even need to write CITES papers for plants. You just need, as a store, you need this plant passport. And every plant you buy usually has one. So that's actually every single orchid is in CITES. So even if you buy an orchid at a normal store, that's a CITES plant, actually. But yeah, it has a plant passport. Internationally, it's basically the same. So we do get shipments from outside the EU with imported plants from Southeast Asia, from Ecuador, for example. Those are checked. They get, just like animals, they get checked. As an inspector from the bureau that's responsible, that opens the package, that checks everything, checks all the paperwork. We have to sign it up in traces. That's like a European combined portal for importing, plants and animals that are protected. So they know the package is coming, they know where it's going, and they have a set date when the inspection is done and so on. So we do have to do all that. But with plants, just like with animals, brown boxing is a problem. Like you can go on Facebook now, write one of these poachers privately, I would like to buy a plant, and he's just going to stick it in like an unlabeled package and send it here and hope it gets through. The fines for that would be, in case of CITES protected plants, be astronomical. But of course, sometimes they get through, and people in the EU also do this. But mostly I think over 90% of the market is in Asia, especially China.
Interesting.
Always the damn Chinese.
I mean, there are a lot of them. So proportionally, I guess they buy a lot more.
Yeah.
And also they have a different outlook on these things. I think we're in Europe, at least, we're a lot more conscious of this. And if people do this, like if they get illegal plants, even illegal animals, they are not so stupid as to share it, which is something that like the poached plants and animals in Asia, they just share them publicly. They don't care. It's, in their countries, it's also often just not illegal.
Okay.
But so, like the moral and ethical compass is a bit different there about these plants and animals.
Yeah, that's true. Same goes for a lot of Australian lizards, which somehow end up there, and then
I'm relatively certain that a lot of people in the EU also do this, but they're not stupid enough to announce it publicly.
Yeah, I was wondered, because we talked about a lot of great topics, and we could get into this for many hours more, but is there something you hope for when it comes to the connection between plants and terrariums and the hobbyists? Like, is there something you hope we move towards, or how the future looks?
I mean, the answer is sort of generic. I mean, you still see a lot of expos sellers selling animals that are clearly unwell, often to customers that clearly just impulse bought this animal or are impulse buying this animal, and they will sell it anyway. I would really like if that stopped happening. Also in Germany, you have a different legal situation depending on the state, which animals you can keep and which you can't. Some of this is really stupid. For example, here in North Rhine-Westphalia, I'm not allowed to keep Poecilotheria anymore because they're too dangerous, apparently, which is ridiculous. But I would really like to see some sort of like basic check, like a competency check before you get honestly any pet, like even a dog or a cat. I would really like if there was some way to, at least, I know people will still keep the animals without doing their like exam and stuff, but then there's something legal you can do. And I know it's difficult to find an authority for this and so on, but ideally I would really like at least some sort of check on this. And in regards to plants and animals, I mean, ideally I would like every terrarium to be planted beautifully. I mean, not only for the animals' sake. I mean, the animals sort of don't care most of the time, if we're being honest. If you have a plastic SpongeBob house in there or a beautiful landscaped terrarium. But I think just from the aesthetic of it, like I know like a lot of keepers, like snake keepers and so on, and they have these really ugly boxes in their home. And yeah, it's cool that you have this animal as a hobby, but really your home is full of ugly wood boxes. And you see your snake maybe once a month when you look in there. You would probably see it a lot more and would appreciate the animal a lot more if it was in a beautiful environment. And I think it would be nice if the hobby moved more towards that. But I think it is actually. A lot of people are moving towards that. I mean, but in Till's background, I see the corner of something very cool.
Yes.
And in your background, I see, of course, your beautiful saltwater tank.
Yeah, this is my setup. I initially built it during the COVID pandemic because I wanted to have something nice next to my desk.
Mhm.
And I just planned to put plants in there, but then I ended up putting at least the anole in there, so he has some space, but needs some more branches too.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just a general thing. I've kept terrariums and I've had really nice terrariums for over 10 years now. And
Yeah,
it's just such a normal, regular thing for me to come home and you have something that's lit up and it's beautiful and you have plants in there. And I think with COVID, a lot of people sort of started feeling that urge as well to have their home
yeah,
be really nice because they were stuck there. And that's how the houseplants got this hype, this trend that people want something nice and green in their home. And I think
yeah,
quite a few of them are now looking at, they got into plants. They're looking at plants that you just cannot grow as a houseplant. And they're starting to get into terrariums
yeah,
now. And it's just such a normal thing for me. I get home, there's a terrarium, there's something lit up. It's nice in the evening, something to watch. And visiting someone that doesn't have any terrarium or any aquarium or any house plant, it's so weird. Going
it's
in there,
wrong. Yeah,
there's nothing green. It's just a cave. I'm sorry,
yeah.
but yeah, it's kind of weird,
Yeah.
honestly.
Also, if people don't have any house plants, it's
Mm.
the green is missing. With this one, it was like I had to work from home, so I was sitting in the room next to my reptile room for 8 hours on the computer, and I was like, man, I'm at home all the time, and I don't even see my pets and plants.
Mm.
So I did build this in my old flat next to my desk for exact that
Yeah,
feeling
yeah.
while I was working. Yeah.
Wonderful. Let's maybe it's time to get into our last question, a bit of the premise of this podcast. We in the introduction we already talked a bit what was the reason for starting this project, and yeah, as we got asked like what is the difference between European and American herpetoculture and every element that surrounds that, and that was very hard for us to answer. So we felt like, okay, maybe it's time to first off, shine a light on European herpetoculture from our perspective, and also because we were trying to find out if there's even a difference, and if there is, how the difference is perceived. So for you, as somebody who comes from the hobby but also now runs a business that is becoming a bigger element within our hobby, I feel, and I love it. It's a very important one. Do you feel there's a huge difference between how us Europeans approach it and either, for instance, Asia, Australia, or the United States?
That's a very difficult question to answer because I'm not over there. So I only see what sort of the more popular things that I see, and there's a difference there. In America, everything is bigger and it's louder, and it's a bit more um, exaggerated, I would say. But that's stuff that's produced usually for content for social media, so it's not very real anyway. And I know some keepers in the US and in Canada, and there's practically no difference that I've noticed with them. They have basically the same outlook, except all of their terrariums are smaller. That's recommended here. That's one difference I'm noticing consistently, is that they will say like a pair of dart frogs is okay in like a 1 feet by 1 feet area, which you wouldn't do here probably, hopefully. But they do tell me things about, like, they have reptile expos there as well. and that's very, very different. Like it's a lot more of a show there than it is here. Where here we have very strict rules for sellers to not handle the animals, to have the animals in containers where the sides are all closed so they don't get stressed, to have proper setup in the box and so on. And over there, it's just people just taking out snakes and playing with them and showing customers and so on. It's very, very common there. And parents with children going there basically just as entertainment, which you do get here, but the sellers usually don't play along with that. They won't take out a snake to show to a child. But that's something you definitely get over there from what I've heard. So it feels like a bit more, well, maybe there's a bit, it's hard to say, but there seems like in Europe you have a bit more respect for the animal as an animal, rather than as like an object to show off. I mean, you do get that here as well, definitely a lot. But I feel like it's the proportion is different.
Interesting answer. Yeah, but I totally understand you, but it's only how we perceive it, of course. And that's also because we were like, what makes us almost that, because it was almost I got talked to, and a lot of my friends in Europe by America got talked to, like it's some sort of a I don't want to say gold standard, but a bit elevated or whatever. And we were like, why?
Have you seen the people at expos?
Yeah.
What standard?
Believe me, it ain't always that great. So, and that's also, I think, a part marketing. On the other hand, as we talked about, I feel like the people in our hobby are relatively private. And there's also a lot of really nice stuff going on. But I'm sure that's the same on the other side, and also in Asia, and also definitely in Australia. I see amazing keepers from.
Yes, I see in Asia, I see people there so far ahead of us with the terrariums they build. Yeah, absolutely beautiful setups where we're miles away. Even we are. Yeah, like, I can't build what they built there, and just the time and dedication and effort that goes into just a tiny little terrarium there. It's quite amazing. But then on the other hand, of course, I mentioned the poaching problem in Asia, and that's where most of the poached plants and animals go to, because they just have a different outlook there on that. And it's a lot closer. I think that's also a factor.
Yeah, and I just remembered that photos and videos aren't allowed at our expos, at least in Germany. So the people from overseas won't ever see, most likely, some footage of our expos, so they don't get that over there.
Yeah. I feel like if you go to our expo and you go there with your kid in the stroller, people around you are like judging you.
Yeah.
They are.
I know I am.
I am as well.
Like, what? This is not a place for you.
But it's funny that you said that with the taking animals out, because the first time that I went to the Terraristica in Hamm, I was like, man, I hope somebody will show me a boa constrictor, and I hope I can I can handle it or something like this. So this was my main goal for my first Terraristica back then, because I just wanted to see keep up a snake or something like this. Yeah, and I was pretty disappointed when I noticed nobody will take out an animal for me just to not buy it.
I think the Terraristica Hamm is for certain a bad place to go if you're a first time keeper or whatever.
I mean, you won't see anything anyway because you're not getting to the stands.
No.
True.
No. It's not a fun place to be.
Yeah. Same goes for the Botanica. I have a feeling it's always very crowded, and
I mean, I have the advantage of being a seller there, so I'm there early. So I do get to see some stuff, but really the last few times I went to Terraristica before COVID and before having jungle leaves, I really only went there to pick up stuff I agreed on beforehand.
Yeah, just meeting the people.
And talking.
And I'm not saying this to to get on good food. But Jungle Leaves is one of the few reasons I go into the terrariumplants and similar sellers, because for the rest I'd rather just stay at the cafe. Till, were there any questions you had left, or?
I don't think so.
Okay, because
Not yet.
maybe then it's cool, because we then first off, thank you so much for joining us. I thought it was really great fun. And
Thank you for having me.
yeah, again, that was perfect. And for Till and I, it's still also a learning experience. So thank you so much for being part of that. But we already talked about your store a bit. For people that are maybe looking they're curious about the store and the plans you offer and the info you offer. You do have a table at the terrariumplants. So for people listening, and if you're in Europe, maybe go and visit. But if there's, at what places can they find you? Are there any links you want to point to, or?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we have an actual store you can go to. So if you're in the area for the Terraristica, and you're maybe staying a few days, if you come from abroad, visit us. We have regular opening hours. You'll find the address on the website. It's jungle-leaves.de. There's an English version of the site as well. You can just switch it over to English, and you can visit our store. You can follow us on Instagram. The Instagram is jungle_leaves_shop. And just rather recently, we also have a YouTube channel just called Jungle Leaves. You can find it on YouTube, and we post regular videos once a week, usually, sometimes more often, about particular plants, or more recently building a terrarium, for example. And you will find that there.
Do you also want to point out your private Instagram? Because there are also some very, very interesting photos and videos of very cool
sure.
plants.
I do have a private Instagram that I kind of neglect these days because I have a lot to do with Jungle Leaves. But yeah, it's Frupus65 is my private Instagram, and there you will find photos of my private plants, but also of bugs and other animals that I keep. At the moment, mostly plants, but as I'm getting back into animals, you can expect some more animal photos and reels on there as well.
Nice. Great. And biotope with ant plants. You're still here.
Stefan?
Yeah, you're still
okay. You were gone.
Was I gone again?
Yeah.
Oh. Uh-oh.
What was the last thing you said?
Okay. Well, then I think it's time to say thank you to everybody for listening. We really enjoyed this one, and wunderbar. It's my favorite German word.
It
was great fun being here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for your time and patience, and
I would say have a great evening.